17:26. Leviticus 26 provides a detailed list of rewards for following God's commandments and a detailed list of punishments for not following them. Leviticus 17 establishes sacrifices at the tabernacle as an everlasting ordinance, but this ordinance is altered in later books, with the temple being the only place in which sacrifices are allowed. Numbers. An open Torah scroll, Book of Numbers part, and a reading pointer, yard. The Book of Numbers is the fourth book of the Torah. 29. The book has a long and complex history, but its final form is probably due to a priestly redaction, i.e., editing, of a Yahwistic source made sometime in the early Persian period, 5th century BCE. 6. The name of the book comes from the two censuses taken of the Israelites. Numbers begins at Mount Sinai, where the Israelites had received their laws and covenant from God, and God has taken up residence among them in the sanctuary. 30. The task before them is to take possession of the promised land. The people are counted and preparations are made for resuming the march. The Israelites begin the journey, but they murmur at the hardships along the way, and about the authority of Moses and Aaron. For these acts, God destroys approximately 15,000 of them through various means. They arrive at the borders of Canaan and send spies into the land. Upon hearing the spies' fearful report concerning the conditions in Canaan, the Israelites refuse to take possession of it. God condemns them to death in the wilderness until a new generation can grow up and carry out the task. The book ends with the new generation of Israelites in the plains of Moab ready for the crossing of the Jordan River. 31. Numbers is the culmination of the story of Israel's exodus from oppression in Egypt and their journey to take possession of the land God promised their fathers. As such, it draws to a conclusion the theme as introduced in Genesis and played out in Exodus and Leviticus. God has promised the Israelites that they should become a great, i.e. numerous, nation, that they will have a special relationship with Yahweh their God, and that they shall take possession of the land of Canaan. Numbers also demonstrates the importance of holiness, faithfulness and trust. Despite God's presence and his priests, Israel lacks faith and the possession of the land is left to a new generation. 6. Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is the fifth book of the Torah. Chapters 130 of the book consist of three sermons or speeches delivered to the Israelites by Moses on the plains of Moab, shortly before they entered promised land. The first sermon recounts the 40 years of wilderness wanderings which had led to that moment, and ends with an exhortation to observe the law, or teachings, later referred to as the law of Moses. The second reminds the Israelites of the need to follow Yahweh and the laws, or teachings, he has given them, on which their possession of the land depends, and the third offers the comfort that even should Israel prove unfaithful and so lose the land, with repentance all can be restored. 32. The final 4 chapters, 31-34, contain the Song of Moses, the Blessing of Moses, and narratives recounting the passing of the mantle of leadership from Moses to Joshua and, finally, the death of Moses on Mount Nebo. Presented as the words of Moses delivered before the conquest of Canaan, a broad consensus of modern scholars see its origin in traditions from Israel, the northern kingdom, brought south to the kingdom of Judah in the wake of the Assyrian conquest of Rome, 8th century BCE, and then adapted to a program of nationalist reform in the time of Josiah, late 7th century BCE, with the final form of the modern book. Emerging in the milieu of the return from the Babylonian captivity during the late 6th century BCE. 33. Many scholars see the book as reflecting the economic needs and social status of the Levite caste, who are believed to have provided its authors winking sad smiley. 34. Those likely authors are collectively referred to as the Deuteronomists. One of its most significant verses is Deuteronomy 6:4. 35. the Shema Israel, which has become the definitive statement of Jewish identity. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Verses 6:4-5 were also quoted by Jesus in Mark 12:28, 34, 36, as part of the Great Commandment. Composition. The Talmud states that the Torah was written by Moses, with the exception of the last 8 verses of Deuteronomy, describing his death and burial, being written by Joshua. 37. According to the Mishnah, one of the essential tenets of Judaism is that God transmitted the text of the Torah to Moses. 38. Over the span of 40 years the Israelites were in the desert. 39. And Moses was like a scribe who was dictated to and wrote down all of the events, the stories and the commandments. 40. According to Jewish tradition, the Torah was recompiled by Ezra during Second Temple period. 41, 42. The Talmud says that Ezra changed the script used to write the Torah from the older Hebrew script to Assyrian script, so called according to the Talmud, because they brought it with them from Assyria. 43. Maharsha says that Ezra made no changes to the actual text of the Torah based on the Torah's prohibition of making any additions or deletions to the Torah in Deuteronomy 12:32. 44. One common formulation of documentary hypothesis. By contrast, the modern scholarly consensus rejects Mosaic authorship, and affirms that the Torah has multiple authors and that its composition took place over centuries. 6. The precise process by which the Torah was composed, the number of authors involved, and the date of each author are hotly contested. Throughout most of the 20th century, there was a scholarly consensus surrounding the documentary hypothesis, which posits 4 independent sources, which were later compiled together by a redactor: J. the Jahwist source, E. the Elohist source, P. the priestly source, and D. the Deuteronomist source. The earliest of these sources, J, would have been composed in the late 7th or the 6th century BCE, with the latest source, P, being composed around the 5th century BCE. The consensus around the documentary hypothesis collapsed in the last decades of the 20th century. 45. The groundwork was laid with the investigation of the origins of the written sources in oral compositions, implying that the creators of J&E were collectors and editors and note authors and historians. 46. Rolf Rentef, building on this insight, argued that the basis of the Pentateuch lay in short, independent narratives, gradually formed into larger units and brought together in 2 editorial phases. The first Deuteronomic, the second priestly. 47. By contrast, John Van Seters advocates a supplementary hypothesis, which posits that the Torah was derived from a series of direct additions to an existing corpus of work. 48. A neo-documentarian hypothesis, which responds to the criticism of the original hypothesis and updates the methodology used to determine which text comes from which sources, has been advocated by biblical historian Joel S. Baden, among others. 49, 50. Such a hypothesis continues to have adherents in Israel and North America. 50. The majority of scholars today continue to recognize Deuteronomy as a source, with its origin in the law code produced at the court of Joshua as described by DeWitt, subsequently given a frame during the exile, the speeches and descriptions at the front and back of the code, to identify it as the words of Moses. 51. The supplementary hypothesis, one potential successor to the documentary hypothesis. Most scholars also agree that some form of priestly source existed, although its extent, especially its endpoint, is uncertain. 52. The remainder is called collectively non-priestly, a grouping which includes both pre-priestly and post-priestly material. 53. Date of compilation. The final Torah is widely seen as a product of the Persian period, 539–333 BCE. probably 450–350 BCE. 54. This consensus echoes a traditional Jewish view which gives Ezra, the leader of the Jewish community on its return from Babylon, a pivotal role in its promulgation. 55. Many theories have been advanced to explain the composition of the Torah, but two have been especially influential. 56. The first of these, Persian imperial authorization, advanced by Peter Fry in 1985, holds that the Persian authorities required the Jews of Jerusalem to present a single body of law as price of local autonomy. 57. Fry's theory was, according to Eskenazi, systematically dismantled at an interdisciplinary symposium held in 2000, but the relationship between the Persian authorities and Jerusalem remains a crucial question. 58. The second theory, associated with Joel P. Weinberg and called the Citizen Temple Community, proposes that the exodustry was composed to serve the needs of a post-exilic Jewish community organized around the temple, which acted in effect as a bank for those who belonged to it. 59. A minority of scholars would place the final formation of the Pentateuch somewhat later, in the Hellenistic 333–164 BCE, or even Hasmonean 140–37 BCE periods. 60. Russell Merkin, for instance, argues for a Hellenistic dating on the basis that the Elephantine papyri, the records of a Jewish colony in Egypt dating from the last quarter of the 5th century BCE, make no reference to a written Torah, the Exodus, or to any other biblical event, though it does mention the festival of Passover. 61. Adoption of Torah law. Joshua hearing the reading of Book of Deuteronomy, illustration by Julius Schneor von Karlsfeld. In his seminal Prolegomena Geschichte Israels, Julius Wellhausen argued that Judaism as a religion based on widespread observance of the Torah and its laws first emerged in 444 BCE when, according to the biblical account provided in the Book of Nehemiah, chapter 8, a priestly scribe named Ezra read a copy of the Mosaic Torah before the populace of Judea assembled in a central Jerusalem square. 62. Wellhausen believed that this narrative should be accepted as historical because it sounds plausible, noting the credibility of the narrative appears on the face of it. 63. Following Wellhausen, most scholars throughout the 20th and early 21st centuries have accepted that widespread Torah observance began sometime around the middle of the 5th century BCE. More recently, Jonathan Adler has argued that in fact there is no surviving evidence to support the notion that the Torah was widely known, regarded as authoritative, and put into practice prior to the middle of the 2nd century BCE. 64. Adler explored the likelihood that Judaism, as the widespread practice of Torah law by Jewish society at large, first emerged in Judea during the reign of the Hasmonean dynasty, centuries after the putative time of Ezra. 65. Significance in Judaism. Torahs in Ashkenazi Synagogue, Istanbul, Turkey. Traditional views on authorship. Rabbinic writings state that the oral Torah was given to Moses at Mount Sinai, which, according to the tradition of Orthodox Judaism, occurred in 1312 BCE. The Orthodox rabbinic tradition holds that the written Torah was recorded during the following 40 years, 66. Though many non-Orthodox Jewish scholars affirm the modern scholarly consensus that the written Torah has multiple authors and was written over centuries. 67. All classical rabbinic views hold that the Torah was entirely Mosaic and of divine origin. 68. Present-day Reform and liberal Jewish movements all reject Mosaic authorship, as do most shades of conservative Judaism. 69. Ritual use. Presentation of the Torah, by Edward Moyes, 1860, Museum of Jewish Art and History. Torah reading, Hebrew, Kiryat HaTorah. Reading, of The Torah is a Jewish religious ritual that involves the public reading of a set of passages from a Torah scroll. The term often refers to the entire ceremony of removing the Torah scroll, or scrolls, from the ark, chanting the appropriate excerpt with traditional cantillation, and returning the scroll, to the ark. It is distinct from academic Torah study. Regular public reading of the Torah was introduced by Ezra the scribe after the return of the Jewish people from the Babylonian captivity, c. 537 BCE, as described in the Book of Nehemiah. 70. In the modern era, adherents